I was sitting on my front porch in Phoenix, Arizona, enjoying my Saturday morning coffee when two men in pseudo-police uniforms pulled up in a white sedan with magnetic signs that read HOA Security Patrol. The moment I saw those cheap plastic badges gleaming in the desert sun, I knew my peaceful weekend was about to take a turn. The taller one, built like a retired linebacker gone soft, approached first. His partner, a wiry guy with a clipboard, stayed 2 steps behind. Neither looked like they had ever seen the inside of a police academy, but their swagger suggested they thought otherwise. "Sir, we need to speak with you about multiple violations," the tall one announced, his hand resting on what I assumed was supposed to look like a duty belt. "I'm Officer Reynolds, and this is Officer Martinez with the Sunset Hills HOA Enforcement Division." I set my coffee down slowly, already feeling my blood pressure rise. "Officer, you guys aren't real police officers." Reynolds puffed his chest out. "We have full authority granted by the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association to enforce community standards and issue citations." Martinez flipped through his clipboard. "We have documented 7 violations at this property over the past 2 weeks. That's going to be $1,400 in fines." I stood up, crossing my arms. "What violations? My lawn is mowed, my house is painted, and I don't even have decorations up." "Your trash cans were visible from the street on Thursday at 2 p.m., Martinez read off his list. "Trash collection occurs at 6 a.m. "Cans must be removed within 2 hours of collection. That's a $200 fine." "I was at work," I said, my voice tight. "I got home at 5:30 and brought them in immediately." Reynolds stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. "Doesn't matter. Rules are rules." "You also parked your truck in your driveway instead of the garage on 3 separate occasions. That's 3 violations at $200 each. My garage is full of boxes. I'm still unpacking. I moved in 6 weeks ago." "Not our problem," Reynolds said, pulling out what looked like a ticket book. "And your front door wreath is the wrong shade of red. Only burgundy is allowed for door decorations. That's another $200. I felt my jaw clench. "This is insane. I've never heard of half these rules." Martinez smirked. "Ignorance of HOA bylaws isn't an excuse. You signed the agreement when you purchased the property." "Fine," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "Show me these rules in writing. Show me the specific bylaws I'm supposedly violating." The 2 fake officers exchanged glances. Reynolds reached for his belt. "Sir, are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" "Lawful order? You're not cops. You can't give me lawful orders." "We have enforcement authority," Reynolds insisted, his hand moving to what I now realized was pepper spray. "If you continue to resist, we will have to detain you until real police arrive." That's when I pulled out my phone. "Then let's call the real police right now and see what they think about you two pretending to be officers." Reynolds lunged forward, trying to grab my phone. "You can't record us without permission. That's illegal." I stepped back, keeping my phone out of reach. "Actually, in Arizona, I can record anyone in public or on my property, and you threatening me is definitely something I want documented." Martinez moved to block my front door. "Sir, we need you to calm down and accept these citations. If you refuse, we have authority to place a lien on your property." "No, you don't," I said, already dialing 911. "The HOA might be able to find me through proper channels, but you two playing dress-up definitely can't." Reynolds reached for his pepper spray canister. "Put the phone down now or we will use force." The 911 operator answered. "911, what's your emergency?" "I have 2 men in fake police uniforms on my property threatening me with pepper spray and trying to impersonate law enforcement officers," I said clearly. My phone's camera pointed directly at both of them. "They're claiming to be HOA officers with arrest authority." Reynolds went pale. Martinez started backing toward their car. "We're not impersonating anyone. We're authorized HOA enforcement." The operator's voice became more urgent. "Sir, are you in immediate danger? Are these men armed?" One has pepper spray drawn. They've threatened to detain me and use force if I don't pay made-up fines. Officers are en route. Stay on the line and maintain distance if possible. Reynolds lowered his pepper spray slightly but didn't put it away. You're making a big mistake. The HOA president isn't going to be happy about this. I don't care what your HOA president thinks. You two are impersonating peace officers, which is a felony in Arizona. Martinez had made it back to the car and was urgently whispering something into his phone. Reynolds stood his ground, clearly torn between retreating and trying to maintain his authority fantasy. We have every right to be here, Reynolds insisted. The HOA board hired us specifically to crack down on violations. People like you think you can just ignore the rules. Show me your actual credentials, I demanded. Real police ID, not plastic badges you bought online. We don't need credentials. The HOA board authorized us. The HOA board can't authorize you to impersonate police officers. That's not how the law works. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Reynolds finally seemed to grasp the situation he was in. Look, maybe we can work this out. Just pay the fines and we'll forget this whole thing. Absolutely not. You threatened me on my own property. 2 Phoenix Police Department cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. 4 real officers emerged, hands near their weapons, assessing the situation quickly. Who called? A female officer asked, her nameplate reading Chen. I raised my hand, still holding my phone. I did. These 2 men showed up claiming to be HOA officers with arrest authority. They threatened me with pepper spray when I refused to pay fines they made up on the spot. Officer Chen turned to Reynolds and Martinez. Are you 2 carrying weapons? Reynolds reluctantly held up the pepper spray. Just this. We're authorized HOA enforcement officers. No such thing exists, Chen said flatly. Put the pepper spray on the ground slowly and step away from it. We have authority from the HOA board, Martinez protested, but his voice wavered. A male officer, named Tag Reading Park, moved closer. There's no legal entity called an HOA officer in Arizona. Are you licensed security guards? Both men went silent. Officer Park repeated the question more firmly. I asked if either of you holds a valid Arizona security guard license. The HOA hired us to enforce rules, Reynolds said weakly. That's not an answer, Chen said. She looked at me. Can you show me what happened? I played back the video I'd captured, starting from when Reynolds first approached. The officers watched in silence as the confrontation unfolded on my phone screen, their expressions growing increasingly stern. They're wearing uniforms designed to look like police, Officer Park observed. Those badges, the belt setup, even the way the uniforms are colored. That's clearly meant to deceive, Chen nodded. And you threatened to detain him, she asked Reynolds. We were just trying to enforce community standards, Reynolds muttered. By threatening a homeowner with pepper spray and falsely claiming arrest authority, Park said. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. What? You're arresting us, Martinez's voice cracked. We didn't do anything wrong. Impersonating a peace officer is a Class 6 felony in Arizona, Chen explained as she handcuffed Reynolds. You're also looking at possible assault charges for threatening him with pepper spray. Park cuffed Martinez while reading both men their rights. The reality of the situation seemed to finally hit them. Martinez started babbling about how the HOA president, Karen Hutchins, had told them this was all legal and proper. Who hired you? Chen asked as she guided Reynolds toward her patrol car. Karen Hutchins. She's the HOA president. She said the board voted to create an enforcement patrol because too many people were violating rules. And she told you to dress like police officers, Reynolds hesitated. She said we needed to look official. She bought the uniforms online. Officer Park shook his head. You realize that doesn't make it legal, right? If I tell you it's okay to rob a bank, you still go to jail for robbing the bank. I stood on my porch, watching the surreal scene unfold. A few neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the police presence. I recognized Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down and the elderly Mr. Cho from across the street. Officer Chen came back to speak with me. "Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "They threatened me, tried to extort money, and impersonated law enforcement." "We'll need your full statement," she said, pulling out a tablet. "Walk me through everything from the beginning." I spent the next 20 minutes giving a detailed account while Officer Park searched the fake officer's vehicle. He emerged with boxes of blank citation forms, a receipt for the uniforms and badges, and a thick folder of what appeared to be HOA bylaws. "This is interesting," Park called out, flipping through documents. "They've been doing this all over the neighborhood. I'm seeing citations issued to at least 30 different addresses." Chen finished taking my statement and walked over to examine the documents. "We need to contact this Karen Hutchins. This might be bigger than just these two. She lives 4 streets over, Mrs. Patterson volunteered, having walked over to my yard. "She's been president for 3 years and she's made everyone miserable. Last month she fined me because my rose bushes were supposedly too tall." "Did you pay the fine?" Chen asked. Mrs. Patterson nodded. $200. "She threatened to put a lien on my house if I didn't," Mr. Cho spoke up. "She got me too, said my mailbox was the wrong shade of black, cost me $300 to repaint it and pay the fine." Officer Chen exchanged a look with Park. "This sounds like organized fraud." "How many people would you estimate paid these fines?" "Most of the neighborhood," Mrs. Patterson said. "Anyone who resisted got bigger fines and more threats. She'd send these 2 goons to intimidate people." Officer Park pulled out his radio. "I'm calling for a detective." This is definitely bigger than a simple impersonation case. Within 30 minutes, Detective Sarah Morrison arrived in an unmarked car. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that took in every detail. After conferring with Officers Chen and Park, she came directly to me. "I understand you're the one who finally called this in," she said. "I wasn't about to let fake cops shake me down on my own property," I replied. Detective Morrison smiled slightly. "Good instinct. Most people just pay to avoid trouble. Can you walk me through your interaction again?" "I want every detail." I recounted the story once more while she took notes. She asked pointed questions about specific threats Reynolds and Martinez had made, what they'd claimed about their authority, and exactly how much money they'd demanded. $1,400, she confirmed. "For violations including visible trash cans and parking in your own driveway." "And a wreath that was apparently the wrong shade of red," I added. She shook her head. "Even if these were legitimate HOA violations, which they're not, the fines are way above what's typically allowed. Arizona law caps HOA fines at specific amounts and requires due process." More neighbors had gathered, and Detective Morrison spent the next hour collecting statements from anyone who'd paid fines to Reynolds and Martinez. The stories were remarkably similar. The fake officers would show up unannounced, cite obscure or made-up violations, demand immediate payment, and threaten liens or arrest for non-compliance. Mr. Cho had paid $800 over 3 months. Mrs. Patterson was up to $1,200. A younger couple, the Johnsons, had forked over $2,000 to avoid having their car impounded for being parked on the street overnight. "That's not even an HOA matter," Detective Morrison noted. "That's a city ordinance issue, and there's no overnight parking ban in this neighborhood anyway." She tallied up the statements. "We're looking at over $30,000 collected in just 3 months. This is organized fraud, extortion, and impersonating peace officers. I need to speak with this Karen Hutchins immediately." I volunteered to show her which house was Karen's. Detective Morrison drove while I rode along, pointing out the Mediterranean-style home with the perfectly manicured lawn and the HOA president's sign planted prominently in the front yard. Karen Hutchins answered the door wearing a tennis outfit and an expression of practiced superiority that faltered the moment she saw the detective's badge. "Karen Hutchins. I'm Detective Morrison with Phoenix PD. I need to speak with you about your HOA enforcement patrol." Karen's face cycled through several emotions before settling on indignant. Whatever those homeowners are complaining about now, I'm sure it's overblown. We have rules for a reason. Ma'am, I need you to step outside. We need to discuss the two men you hired to patrol the neighborhood. Reynolds and Martinez. They're perfectly professional. If someone is complaining about being cited for legitimate violations, that's not my problem. Detective Morrison's expression hardened. Mrs. Hutchins, those men are currently in custody for impersonating peace officers. They threatened residents with detention and used fake police credentials. I need to know what role you played in this operation. Karen's superiority crumbled instantly. Custody, that's ridiculous. They're just doing their jobs. Did you tell them to dress like police officers? I told them they needed to look official. How else are people supposed to take them seriously, Mrs. Hutchins? You can't hire people to pretend to be cops. That's illegal. They're not pretending to be cops. They're HOA enforcement officers. That's completely different. I watched this exchange with growing satisfaction. Karen had finally encountered someone who didn't care about her self-important HOA title. Detective Morrison pulled out her phone, showing Karen a photo of Reynolds and Martinez in their uniforms. Does this look like private security to you, or does it look like they're trying to appear to be police officers? Karen sputtered. I don't know, I just wanted the rules enforced, by threatening residents, by claiming arrest authority, by carrying weapons. I never told them to threaten anyone. But you did tell them to collect fines immediately, didn't you? You told them to intimidate people into paying on the spot. Karen's face reddened. People need to follow the rules. I'm tired of this neighborhood looking trashy because people can't be bothered to bring in their trash cans on time. So you decided to create your own private police force. Detective Morrison's tone dripped with disbelief. Mrs. Hutchins, do you have any idea how many laws you've broken? I haven't broken any laws. I'm the HOA president. I have authority to enforce our covenants. You have authority to follow the procedures outlined in your HOA bylaws, which typically involve written notices, board hearings, and proper legal processes. You don't have authority to hire fake cops to shake down your neighbors. Other neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. I recognized several faces from the earlier statement collection. They watched with barely concealed glee as Karen realized the walls were closing in. I want to speak to my lawyer, Karen announced, trying to regain some composure. That's your right, Detective Morrison said, but I need you to come down to the station to give a statement. You can call your lawyer from there. I'm not going anywhere without a warrant. Detective Morrison sighed. Mrs. Hutchins, I can arrest you right now for conspiracy to commit fraud and extortion, or you can cooperate, come to the station voluntarily, and we can sort this out like adults. Your choice. Karen's resolve wavered. She clearly wasn't used to being challenged so directly. This is harassment. I'm going to file a complaint. You do that, Morrison said, unmoved. In the meantime, I need the names of everyone on your HOA board. If they approved this enforcement patrol, they're part of this investigation too. The board didn't approve anything, Karen blurted out. This was my initiative. Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow. So you hired Reynolds and Martinez without board approval? Using what money? Karen's face went from red to pale. She just realized she'd admitted something important. I used HOA funds, but I have discretion for enforcement initiatives. We'll need to see your financial records, Morrison said. All of them. Bank statements, receipts, everything related to payments made to Reynolds and Martinez. You can't just demand our private HOA records. Actually, I can, and I'm getting a warrant for them right now, but if you cooperate, this goes much smoother. I watched Karen Hutchins, the woman who'd terrorized the neighborhood with petty fines and power trips, finally face real consequences. It was deeply satisfying. Another detective arrived, a tall man named Detective Brooks, who apparently specialized in financial crimes. He and Morrison spoke briefly before Brooks approached Karen. Mrs. Hutchins, I need to understand the financial arrangement with your enforcement officers. How much were you paying them? Karen crossed her arms. I already said I want a lawyer. That's fine, but we're getting warrants for HOA bank records, your personal bank records, and any financial documentation related to this scheme. You can make this easier or harder on yourself." Karen's husband arrived home at that moment, pulling into the driveway in a BMW. He emerged looking confused at the scene on his front lawn. "Karen, what's going on? These police are harassing me about the HOA enforcement patrol, Mr. Hutchins, a tired-looking man in business casual attire, closed his eyes briefly. "Oh no, Karen, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything wrong. I was trying to maintain neighborhood standards. She hired fake cops to extort the neighbors," I supplied helpfully. "They threatened me with pepper spray this morning." Mr. Hutchins turned to his wife. "Please tell me that's not true." Karen's silence was answer enough. He ran a hand through his graying hair. "Karen, I told you this enforcement idea was going too far. I told you to go through proper channels." "Nobody listens to proper channels. People were ignoring violation notices. Because half the violations you were citing weren't real," Mr. Hutchins exploded. "I've been telling you for months that you're abusing your position, but you wouldn't listen." This was getting better by the minute. Detective Morrison let the couple argue for a moment before interrupting. "Mr. Hutchins, were you aware of your wife's enforcement patrol?" He nodded miserably. "She mentioned hiring security, but I didn't know she'd dress them up like cops. I told her it was a bad idea, but she insisted the board had given her authority." "The board didn't approve this," Morrison stated. "I'm not surprised," Mr. Hutchins said. "Karen tends to interpret board authority very broadly. She considers herself the final word on all HOA matters." "That's not true," Karen protested. "The board trusts my judgment." "The board is terrified of you," her husband countered. "You've threatened to fine every single member over some petty issue or another. They rubber stamp whatever you want because opposing you isn't worth the harassment." Detective Morrison took detailed notes. "I'm going to need contact information for all board members." Mr. Hutchins pulled out his phone and started sharing contact information. Karen looked betrayed but said nothing, perhaps finally realizing that fighting would only make things worse. Over the next hour, more details emerged. Karen had been paying Reynolds and Martinez $3,000 each per month from HOA funds, claiming it was for security services. The HOA's annual budget was only $30,000, meaning Karen had been spending nearly a quarter of the entire yearly budget on her fake cop patrol. Additionally, the fines that Reynolds and Martinez collected weren't being deposited into the HOA account. They were going into a separate account that only Karen controlled. Detective Brooks discovered this by examining receipts found in the fake officer's vehicle. Karen had been keeping 40% of all collected fines, with Reynolds and Martinez splitting the remaining 60%. "So this was a for-profit scheme," Brooks summarized. "You were using HOA money to pay enforcers who collected fines that went into your personal pocket." "That's not how it was," Karen insisted. "The separate account was for enforcement operations. I was going to transfer it to the main HOA account." "When?" Brooks asked. "You've collected over $30,000 in 3 months. How much have you transferred to the HOA?" Karen's silence answered that question too. Detective Brooks nodded to Morrison, who pulled out handcuffs. "Karen Hutchins, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to impersonate a peace officer." "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "That title doesn't grant you immunity from the law," Morrison said as she cuffed Karen. "You have the right to remain silent." The neighborhood had gathered in force now, watching their tyrannical HOA president finally face consequences. A few people actually applauded. Mrs. Patterson was openly crying with relief. Mr. Hutchins just looked defeated. "Can I call her a lawyer?" "Please do," Detective Morrison said. "She's going to need one." As they loaded Karen into the unmarked car, she was still protesting her innocence, insisting she'd done nothing wrong, that she was just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. Nobody was listening anymore. Detective Brooks stayed behind to continue gathering evidence. He asked me if I'd be willing to serve as a witness when this went to trial. Absolutely, I said. This needs to stop, not just for me but for everyone she's been terrorizing. We'll likely be filing charges against Reynolds and Martinez too, Brooks explained. They're trying to claim they thought everything was legal, but the video you captured shows them making threats and false claims about arrest authority. That's hard to explain away. Over the next few days, the investigation expanded. Detective Brooks obtained warrants for all HOA financial records and discovered that Karen's scheme had been running for nearly 6 months, not 3. The total amount of fraudulent fines collected exceeded $50,000. The HOA board, once they understood the full scope of what Karen had done, voted unanimously to remove her as president and to cooperate fully with the investigation. They also voted to refund every penny that had been paid in fines to the fake enforcement patrol. I got a check for $1,400 even though I'd never paid, apparently as a settlement for the harassment. Mrs. Patterson got her money back. The Johnsons got their $2,000 back. Every household that had been victimized received refunds and formal apologies. The board also announced they were dissolving the enforcement patrol and returning to standard violation procedures, which involved written notices and board hearings, not threats and intimidation. Reynolds and Martinez each faced felony charges for impersonating peace officers and misdemeanor assault charges for threatening residents. Both eventually pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. Reynolds got 18 months in county jail. Martinez got 12 months. Karen Hutchins fought her charges initially, insisting she'd done nothing wrong and that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Her lawyer eventually convinced her that going to trial would result in much harsher sentencing given the overwhelming evidence. She pleaded guilty to fraud and extortion charges 6 months after her arrest. The judge was not sympathetic during sentencing. "Mrs. Hutchins, you abused a position of trust within your community," the judge stated. "You used fear and intimidation to extract money from your neighbors for your personal benefit. You hired individuals to impersonate law enforcement officers, which is a serious crime that undermines public trust in legitimate police. I'm sentencing you to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years probation. You're also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, which the state calculates at $62,000 including damages." Karen tried to speak, but the judge cut her off. "Additionally, you are permanently barred from serving on any homeowner association board in Arizona. Do you understand these terms?" Karen nodded, tears streaming down her face. The woman who'd ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist was finally broken. The aftermath in Sunset Hills was remarkable. With Karen gone, the HOA board implemented new policies focused on reasonable enforcement and community building rather than petty rule obsession. They reduced fine amounts, extended grace periods for violations, and created a transparent appeals process. New board elections were held, and Mrs. Patterson was elected president. Her first act was to revise the bylaws to require board approval for any expenditure over $500 and to mandate monthly financial reports to all homeowners. The neighborhood slowly healed. People who'd been living in fear of arbitrary fines started enjoying their homes again. The Johnsons painted their front door a shade of blue they loved, not the approved beige, and nobody complained. Mr. Cho let his mailbox remain its current shade of black, which apparently was 2% too light according to Karen's standards. I finally finished unpacking my garage and could park my truck inside, though I sometimes left it in the driveway just because I could. My wreath stayed exactly where it was, wrong shade of red and all. About 8 months after the whole ordeal, I was sitting on my front porch again, enjoying a Saturday morning coffee when Mrs. Patterson walked over. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "If you hadn't stood up to those fake cops, Karen would still be terrorizing all of us." "I just didn't want to pay bogus fines," I said with a shrug, "but I'm glad it helped everyone. It did more than help. You freed us. This neighborhood is actually enjoyable now. We're having a block party next month and we'd love for you to come. I'll be there, I promised, Mrs. Patterson smiled and headed back to her house. I watched her go, reflecting on how quickly things had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a new homeowner just trying to settle in. Now I was apparently a neighborhood hero for simply calling the cops on fake cops. The legal proceedings continued for months. Civil suits were filed by multiple residents against Karen personally, seeking damages beyond what the criminal restitution covered. Karen's lawyer tried to argue she couldn't pay, but investigators had found a hidden bank account containing most of the stolen money. The court ordered it liquidated to pay victims. Mr. Hutchins divorced Karen while she was in prison. I felt bad for him. He seemed like a decent guy who'd been married to a tyrant. He moved out of Sunset Hills entirely, telling neighbors he needed a fresh start somewhere his wife's reputation wouldn't follow him. The house sold quickly, and a nice young family moved in. They had 2 kids who played in the front yard, something that would have resulted in multiple fines under Karen's regime. Now it was just considered normal neighborhood life. Detective Morrison stopped by my house one afternoon about a year after the incident. She was following up on the case, making sure all the restitution had been properly distributed. "I wanted to tell you this case made a difference beyond your neighborhood," she said. "We've identified 3 other HOAs in Phoenix running similar schemes, smaller scale but same basic idea. Fake security, fraudulent fines, intimidation tactics. Your willingness to press charges gave us precedent to go after the others." "Are the people running those getting charged too?" I asked. "All of them," she confirmed. 2 HOA presidents and 1 board treasurer. They're facing similar charges to what Karen got. Word is spreading in the HOA community that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. "Good," I said. "HOAs should maintain property values and handle common areas, not terrorize residents over petty nonsense." Morrison nodded. "You'd think that would be obvious, but power corrupts. Give someone a little authority and no oversight and some people go crazy with it." She handed me a card. "If you ever have issues again, call me directly. I'm keeping an eye on HOA complaints now. It's become kind of my specialty." Hopefully I won't need to, but I appreciate it. After she left, I thought about how strange the whole experience had been. I'd moved to Phoenix for a job opportunity and bought a house in what seemed like a nice, quiet neighborhood. Instead, I'd ended up taking down a criminal conspiracy run by a power-hungry HOA president and her fake cop enforcers. Life definitely hadn't gone the way I expected, but I wasn't complaining about the outcome. The neighborhood was better. Dozens of people had gotten their money back and 3 criminals were behind bars where they belonged. My phone rang. It was my sister calling from Seattle. "Hey, how's Arizona treating you?" she asked. "It's been interesting," I said with a laugh. I had to call the cops on fake cops who were trying to write me tickets for HOA violations. "What? Are you serious?" I spent the next hour telling her the whole story. She was alternately shocked, amused, and impressed. "Only you could move into a neighborhood and immediately end up in the middle of a criminal investigation," she said when I finished. "I wasn't trying to. I just wanted to drink my coffee in peace." "Well, you're basically a neighborhood celebrity now. That's pretty cool." "I guess so. Though I'd prefer to just be a regular homeowner without drama." "Too late for that. You're the guy who took down the fake HOA cops. That's your legacy now." She was joking, but there was truth to it. Neighbors still occasionally thank me for standing up to Karen and her enforcers. I'd become known as the person who wouldn't back down from bullies, even when they were wearing fake badges. The block party Mrs. Patterson organized was huge. Nearly every household in Sunset Hills attended. There were grills smoking with burgers and hot dogs, coolers full of drinks, kids running around playing games, and adults actually enjoying each other's company without fear of being fined for having fun. Mrs. Patterson made a speech thanking everyone for coming together as a community. She specifically mentioned how the neighborhood had overcome adversity and become stronger for it. She didn't name me directly, but several people looked my way and raised their drinks in salute. It felt good. I'd moved to Phoenix not knowing anyone, and now I had neighbors who genuinely appreciated me. The whole Karen situation, as awful as it had been for everyone, had ultimately brought the community together. Mr. Cho brought over some homemade kimchi. The Johnsons introduced me to their kids. Other neighbors whose names I'd never learned came up to chat and swap stories about their own encounters with Karen's fake cops. Everyone had a tale of some ridiculous violation and excessive fine. She tried to cite me because my cat sat in my front window, one woman said. Claimed visible pets violated the aesthetic standards. She fined me for having a basketball hoop, a teenage boy added. Said recreational equipment couldn't be visible from the street. My Christmas lights were supposedly 3 days too early, another neighbor contributed. She wanted $500 to make it go away. The stories kept coming, each more absurd than the last. Karen had created an environment of fear and paranoia where people were constantly worried about being fined for simply living in their own homes. It's amazing how different things are now, Mrs. Patterson said. We actually have a community instead of a dictatorship. The party lasted until well after dark. As I walked back to my house that night, full of good food and feeling genuinely connected to my neighbors for the first time, I reflected on how important it had been to make that call to 911. I could have just paid the $1,400. It would have been easier in the short term. Many of my neighbors had chosen that path, not wanting the confrontation or hassle. But paying would have validated Karen's scheme and allowed it to continue. By standing up and demanding accountability, I'd not only protected myself, but had inadvertently protected everyone else. Sometimes doing the right thing is inconvenient. Sometimes it leads to complications and drama. But it's still the right thing. The criminal trials concluded over the following months. Reynolds and Martinez served their sentences and were released on probation with strict conditions. They were barred from any security-related work and had to stay away from Sunset Hills. Karen served her full 3-year sentence. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she'd been a difficult inmate, constantly complaining about conditions and insisting she'd been wrongly convicted. She never took responsibility for what she'd done. When she was finally released on probation, she moved to another state. Arizona HOAs wanted nothing to do with her, and her criminal record made finding housing difficult. The woman who'd once wielded absolute power over hundreds of homeowners was now struggling to rent an apartment. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd had countless opportunities to do things the right way, to be a leader who served her community instead of tyrannizing it. She'd chosen abuse and fraud instead. The consequences were entirely her own making. The legal restitution continued to flow. Every victim received full compensation plus interest. The civil suits added additional damages. By the time everything was settled, Karen had lost her house, her savings, and any hope of a comfortable retirement. She would be paying off judgments for the rest of her life. The Sunset Hills HOA under Mrs. Patterson's leadership became something of a model for how community associations should function. They focused on maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and only addressing actual violations that affected property values or safety. Fines became rare. When they were necessary, they were reasonable in amount and came only after multiple written warnings and opportunities to correct the issue. The appeals process was transparent and fair. Homeowners no longer lived in fear. I continued living my quiet life, working my job, enjoying my house, and participating in community events. The dramatic confrontation with fake cops became a story I told at parties, always getting strong reactions. Some people couldn't believe it had really happened. Others shared their own HOA horror stories, though few matched the brazenness of Karen's scheme. Everyone agreed that HOAs needed better oversight and accountability. Arizona eventually passed new legislation specifically addressing HOA enforcement procedures. The law was informally nicknamed Karen's Law by the media covering its passage. It mandated strict limits on fines, required board approval for all enforcement activities, and imposed criminal penalties for HOA officials who abused their authority. Detective Morrison called to tell me about the new law. "Your case literally changed state law," she said. "That's pretty remarkable." "I just didn't want to pay bogus fines for having the wrong shade of red wreath," I said. She laughed. "Well, your stubbornness resulted in better protections for homeowners across Arizona. You should feel proud." I did feel proud, though it still seemed surreal. I'd never set out to be an activist or reformer. I just stood my ground when threatened and let the justice system do its job. But sometimes that's all it takes. Years later, I was still living in Sunset Hills. The neighborhood had become genuinely pleasant, a place where people knew and liked each other. Property values had actually increased since Karen's removal, contrary to her claims that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain value. Turns out buyers preferred neighborhoods where they wouldn't be harassed by fake cops over minutiae. Who knew? I'd served on the HOA board for a term, helping to continue Mrs. Patterson's reforms. It was boring work, mostly handling landscaping contracts and planning community events, which was exactly what HOA work should be. The whole experience taught me important lessons about standing up to bullies, even when they claimed to have authority. It taught me the value of community solidarity and how quickly people will rally when someone is brave enough to take the first stand. Most importantly, it taught me that fake authority crumbles quickly when confronted with real authority. Reynolds and Martinez had seemed intimidating with their uniforms and badges, but the moment actual police arrived, their power vanished. Karen had ruled through fear, but once someone challenged her, her empire collapsed. I still think about that Saturday morning sometimes, sitting on my porch with my coffee, watching those two fake cops pull up. If I'd made a different choice, if I'd just paid the fines to avoid confrontation, everything would be different. Karen would probably still be terrorizing the neighborhood. Reynolds and Martinez would still be collecting fraudulent fines. Dozens of homeowners would still be living in fear. And I'd be out $1,400 with no guarantee they wouldn't come back for more. Instead, I made one phone call, 911, 3 numbers that changed everything. The real police came. They arrested the fake cops. They investigated the HOA president. Justice was served. The neighborhood healed. Life got better. Sometimes the right choice is also the simple choice. When someone threatens you illegally, you call the real police. When someone tries to extort you, you refuse to pay. When someone abuses authority they don't actually have, you challenge them. It's not always easy, and it doesn't always work out so clearly. But in this case, doing the right thing led to the right outcome. The fake HOA cops who tried writing me tickets were arrested. The real police told them to leave or face arrest themselves. And in the end, all the criminals involved faced justice. My front door wreath is still the wrong shade of red according to Karen's old rules. My truck is parked in my driveway right now. My trash cans were visible from the street for several hours last Thursday. And nobody cares, because we have better things to do than obsess over meaningless violations. That's what a healthy community looks like. That's what an HOA should be. And that's what we finally have, thanks to standing up to fake authority and letting real justice take its course. I finished my coffee, stood up from my porch chair, and headed inside. It was going to be a good day in a good neighborhood, free from the tyranny of fake cops and power-hungry HOA presidents. Sometimes, the good guys really do win.